When I tell people I'm a health journalist and they ask what I write about, I usually refer to the pharma ads they see on TV. You know those ads, the ones replete with people dancing in slow motion under string lights as 40 seconds of ISI is read breathlessly in a gentle corporate voice. Few people outside of the industry know about all of the major players, be they drug makers, medical marketing agencies, health media companies, or patient advocates, let alone the intricate dynamics at play between them. And unless you're born and raised in the industry, medical marketing just doesn't come across your radar on a daily basis. Luckily, this week's guest is a leader who was born and raised in the industry and plays an integral role in the story of MM+M. Ann Gideon, the executive director of the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame, joins the show for a conversation with editor-in-chief Jameson Fleming. She discusses her family's decades-long legacy in the medical marketing industry and how her late father, David, elevated MM+M's profile in the 1980s and 90s. She also reflects on how his contributions will be further recognized at the MM+M Awards in October when we hand out the David Gideon Leadership Award. Then during our trend segment, we're talking about the 2026 Edelman Trust Barometer and why 70% of respondents indicated they hold at least one divisive health belief.
I'm Jameson Fleming here for MM+M, joined today by our wonderful guest celebrating our 60th anniversary. It is Ann Gideon, the executive director of the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame and daughter of the legendary David Gideon in this industry. We'll talk about what you're doing, Ann, and what David's legacy meant to you. But first, welcome.
Hi, Jameson. Thank you so much for having me in that fantastic introduction.
I'm really excited for this conversation because, I mean, you've seen this industry unfold. You've seen MM+M unfold. You've seen the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame, this incredible institution that honors the best of the best, evolve over the years, and now you lead it. So you've got so much incredible experience, and I'm excited to dive into it here.
Yes, me too. Looking forward to it.
All right. So let's start with you, because we can talk about David probably for hours, but because you've got this very cool experience in this industry, I want to hear from you in terms of, you started working underneath your dad. You came over to Haymarket when Haymarket purchased MM+M, and then you've gone on to the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame. So in your words, what was it like during those early years in Haymarket US in the 2000s as Haymarket as an entire entity really started to thrive under Lee Maniscalco?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. Like you said, I came up working underneath my dad. I started working pretty much since birth, so I know every angle of MM+M inside and out. I did mailings with my brother when I was about 7 years old for the BPA circulation. Data entry on the agency issue, which is now the Agency 100. I knew all of the top players in the industry and what they did. I knew the manufacturers. So coming over to Haymarket was actually Lee was not on board when I first came over. So seeing his rise from the medical side, overseeing more like NPR, and come into his own as CEO across Haymarket Media in the US was an amazing path to see, because he and my father were friends. Lee was an advertiser with MM+M under Avenstar, and I think Lee was, he's age-wise between me and my dad, so he kind of looked up to my dad a little bit as a mentor in the industry because they had come from a programming side. And I just really respected Lee, and seeing what he did did not shock me at all, the way he grew MM+M and Haymarket as a whole. I mean, that's the reason why he was inducted. So it went from a really small office in New York City with not a lot of people to the beautiful offices you have now. And the growth you've had is pretty amazing. So
yeah, and when you look back at MM+M during that period, I mean, what are some of the things that stand out to you that are, the publishing industry is radically different now than it was then, but what are some things that were done then that you're just like, it is incredible that this is what MM+M was accomplishing back in the 2000s?
Yeah, so when I first came up, obviously it was just a print world. I mean, we're talking old school mock-up layout, the old art tables and everything. The transition to desktop publishing was huge. And then obviously at the time that my dad sold was really the birth of everything going on digitally with the web exploding. So seeing the integration of publishing really took, a huge hit, and to see the pivot that you guys did to keep going when a lot of journals fell by the wayside. That is really excited to all the offerings that you do now. It's not just that old traditional print editorial print magazine. It's the whole portfolio of everything that you offer is really great. So that I think that's one thing that he would be really proud of as the legacy of the magazine continues.
Yeah. And so, you had a pretty long Haymarket career. I mean, a couple decades working with us. But eventually, you found greener pastures somewhere else at the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame. And so walk me through that transition as, you went from, essentially a production and product manager here at MM+M to, helping run the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame and then eventually taking over running the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame. So what was that transition like? And, how did you prepare for that kind of leap in responsibility?
Well, I mean, it was really easy. It wasn't even a transition. I mean, I grew up working for my dad, and he always has a master plan. He was a very smart man. He asked me if I wanted to help him. I came on as deputy director. I did that for 2 years to kind of learn the ropes for the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame. I knew all about it when, it was created. I remember being at the dinner table and how excited he was before the first gala. So I knew everything that went on. But he wanted to introduce me to people and be hands-on and get involved. I thought we'd have a little more time together. Unfortunately, he passed in 2018. And it was just his wish. I'm going to choke up. It was his wish for me to step up and carry his legacy. I had text messages from him, the gala prior to him passing, that was his wish. It was basically mine now. And so it means the world to me. But really, it's getting to know our members. That was the most key. And also seeing him in action with the hall was very different than it was working under him for medical marketing and media. He said, it's a lot of fun, and it's people pick up your call because they want to. You're not selling them anything. So people are always wanting to talk to you and give back. And he was 100% right about that. So he's always been right about everything and knew that I would love it. And I couldn't be happier to do it. It took me 3 years to pull the plug after he died and leave MM+M. And that was a hard decision because I felt like I was leaving a part of him behind. He means the world to me, but I'm glad I did it because the Hall of Fame has really grown exponentially, and I can really invest all of my time in that. And we have such a great relationship with you guys. I don't feel like it, that it hurt us in any way. So I think moving forward, it was for the best.
Yeah. And I mean, it's such a unique perspective that both you and your father have had in this industry that, at MM+M, you saw what mattered in the moment. And with the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame, it's celebrating what mattered in the past. And so it's a very cool perspective that you've been able to have on this industry. And I want to talk more about the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame in a little bit, but let's talk about your dad. He's absolute legend in this industry. Bought MM+M back in the 80s, held on to it for a couple decades, built it up into, such a reputable publication. I mean, what were some of the tenets of leadership and, business acumen that you most remember him for and impacted you?
I mean, the thing that stands out the most was his integrity. He had a way of always doing the right thing, even if it didn't benefit him. The way he ran the magazine because he was publisher and editor-in-chief, the way he ran the magazine as far as handling his editorial content versus his advertiser, to me, was second to none. Just old school. His innovation, his acceptance of innovation, he was always on the forefront. of adopting new technologies and wasn't scared of them. As a daughter that didn't inherit that risk taking, I wish I could be more like that. He was just so confident in making that next step and taking that next move to ensure that his companies were moving forward and not becoming stagnant.
Yeah. And, I've been thinking about this question in my own life of, my kids see me, who I am, but, someday I'm going to think back to myself and like, what are the moments that I want my kids to remember at least my work career for? So like, what is that one or two moments that stand out to you about your father that really resonate with you? Like, wow, not only is he somebody I admire because he's my father, but like, he really, really walked the walk and talked the talk. Like, what are those moments for you that you always are going to look back fondly on?
That's a really good question. I mean, I know that being his daughter, and I kept his last name because people would always say, you know, are you related to David Gideon? And he's a legend. Like that is just, I couldn't be more proud to be his daughter. And the fact that people always had amazing things to say about him, that he had that impact that resonated with people. After he passed, we asked for quotes I think I asked for 20 people for quotes to use in a short video we did for the Hall of Fame, and the things that people had to say about him. I mean, they just touched my heart so much, but that's just how he led his life. He was successful, but that was really a byproduct of just how he navigated business, and that is something that I try to hold dear and try to do myself, do things for the right reason, not just for money or greed.
Yeah. And, after he passed, as you said, you had a great celebration of his life. Is there, one story that maybe hasn't been talked about much that, you feel like, oh, this is the perfect David moment that I just want the industry to know that we had this moment or he did this thing that maybe many people don't know about him?
I mean, there's so many. My dad had such an amazing life, and they are not all just, you mean industry related or non-industry related? My
It
dad,
doesn't even have to be non-industry related. It could be
he
anything.
was just the coolest dad. Like he loved rock and roll. He wanted to be famous. He played guitar, almost got signed by Warner Brothers. Then they asked their band if they could sing, and they couldn't. He went to Berkeley and played in a band on Thursday night at the Monkey Inn, and the band on Wednesday night. It was the Gollywogs that became Credence. He was in the Navy and had amazing stories there. He was just much more than just what people saw in the industry as a stoic leader. He had these amazing stories about things that he had done that I'm always like, wishing I had that kind of crazy life. The people that he met and the friends that he made along the way. He did publishing in the Caribbean, and one of his really good friends, Sir Royston Hopkins, he got knighted by the Queen, and they asked my dad to attend, and he gave the speech. Like, he was just an amazing person, and I there's so many things about him that are just so cool to me. So,
yeah, absolutely. And the musician thing is interesting because, I'm going to pivot to the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame now for a moment, because one of your inductees this year, Ed Wise, is a musician and was in a Grateful Dead cover band in college. So he's got that in common with your father. The Medical Advertising Hall of Fame, I mean, I've only been in this industry for 2 years, but it's really stood out to me. It's impressive. The leadership programs that you're doing, mentorship programs, expanded into honoring great creative now. There's clearly a forward-looking idea to the Medical Advertising Hall of Fame that's not just celebrating the moments that matter, but it's setting this industry up for success from a leadership standpoint. So walk me through more. What does that vision look like over the next few years? How does it expand? How do you strengthen it to be an even bigger and more integral part of leadership in this industry?
It was started, just to take a step back, the way it was started between my father and Ron Pantello. They were remiss that the history of the industry was being lost, that the founders that had impacted it, the younger generation had no idea what these names were. And so that's always been our mission, and I think that's well intact. But to be an important part of the industry, we really had to shift to offering programs that were impacting the here and now. And so we started that with the Future Famers in 2012. That first year we had 12, and now we have, mid 30s with our membership. It grows every year. And then we've had some great co-chairs the last two tenures. We had Robin Shapiro and Jenny Fischette, and then now our current co-chairs, Tim Pantello and Ken Bagassi, and their passion to really be a convener and a meeting point, and offering things that, as far as learning and development, that's not really offered elsewhere in the industry, has been, their passion for that has really taken off. So I think changing what we see and doing things for the better for the next level of leaders that are coming up, and offering that connection point across the industry. Because when you think about it, our membership is competitors, but when they're in the room together at our board meetings, I mean, it is friends. And that to me is amazing, and part of the reason why I love what I do, because their passion for what they want to see happen in the industry and how they can be a part of that and the programs that they want to do, that's what drives it. So it really, all of the kudos goes to our members and our officers. So I'm really thankful to see that growth, and it's going to continue to happen because I know they're going to have new ideas that we're going to implement.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the things that I love about this industry, both the consumer side and now that I've been in healthcare. It's on the agency side, unless you're at the holding company level, everybody is friendly with each other. Everybody recognizes what's good for you is probably also good for me in most cases. And so everybody supports each other, because ultimately one day you're probably going to end up working with half the people in a room, because everybody jumps all over the place. So it behooves everybody to be friends and be kind to each other. And it's such a cool dynamic. And, there's going to be people listening to this podcast that are probably going to be trying to nominate potential Hall of Famers for next year. So what is your best advice to anyone who's saying, well, I'm going to nominate some industry legend and I want them recognized by the Hall of Fame? What impresses you and the committee when you're looking at listening to these presentations and looking at the entries?
I'm actually very fortunate that I'm not a voting member, so that takes me out of it. I'm just the operational, because I would be so torn. But honestly, I think that the biggest thing, and this is what my dad told me, when he started it, the key point is, how did you make the industry? How did they make the industry better? What did they do to change it? Not just be successful. It's not about, did you make a ton of money? It is, what did you implement that was different? How did you, change? What's the mark that you left? Who are the leaders that you mentored and came up behind you? Those are the things that we're really looking for. It's not just who was successful. So that would be the focus of the nominations. If anybody out there is considering, because we do accept nominations, you don't have to be a member of the Hall of Fame. It's industry wide. So we like to cast as broad a net as we can for the people that should be included.
Okay, perfect. Well, Anne, I'm so grateful for you spending the time with us for this podcast. We're doing one of these 60th anniversary podcasts every month, and it made so much sense for you to be one of the first guests, given your impact on the industry and your father's legacy within this industry. I couldn't think of anybody better to have on this.
I just was so touched when you reached out about the award being named after my dad. As I've mentioned several times behind the scenes, I would generally never do this, but I felt like my dad, he deserved it. And he would be so proud. So thank you so much.
Of course. And to that point, I should have plugged at some point at this. For the MM+M Awards, we've renamed one of our leadership awards for the 60th anniversary after David Gideon. Entries are already in, but we'll start judging those soon. So looking forward to having those conversations next month.
Me too. I'm very much looking forward to it as well. It's going to be a great event, and I'm so touched that you guys are doing that. It's a full circle moment.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Anne, for joining us here today.
Thank you. It was fun.
So it's going to be our trend segment, and it's all going to be based around the Edelman Trust Barometer, which has gotten a lot of pub, most notably in our publication. Bella, you wrote the story, and I remember you came out of the interview and looking over the top line results and said, this is something that's super interesting. We should talk about on the podcast. So we're on the podcast. Let's talk about it. What stood out to you from the Edelman Trust Barometer?
Yeah, so I found this to be a really, really interesting report. I mean, some parts of it were to be expected and reflected in past years' reports. Also, people place a lot of trust in friends and family and increasingly online influencers for health and medical information. But this particular report asked survey respondents a few questions about what are considered divisive health topics, anything from what type of protein is healthiest for you to do the risks of vaccines outweigh the benefits, stuff like that. I think the craziest one that caught my eye was that the belief, whether people hold the belief that vaccines are used for population control. So it really ran a range of topics there. And I think the thing that most surprised me is that the people who held these sort of divisive health beliefs were often educated. They were often, span the political spectrum. A lot of people were more on the left, even though it felt like a lot of these topics have been sort of like repeated by folks and by media on the right. So I just found it to be interesting. And I was curious. I think a survey like this does a good job at capturing maybe what people are not talking openly about with friends and family and on social media and whatnot. And so I think it just, for pharma marketers, as I wrote at the end of the story, asks them to sort of step outside of maybe some preconceived notions about what type of people hold these more controversial health beliefs.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those bigger takeaways. But one that really stuck out to me is there was one finding in there that some of these folks that have multiple divisive health beliefs that they adhere to are people that, for the large part, and it's up to how Edelman even defines it, follow and read traditional news media. Talk a little bit about that, because again, I think if we had said people have these preconceived notions, they're watching Joe Rogan, they're in these kind of marginalized, non-traditional spaces. But this sounds like it's people that watch the evening news or, are otherwise in that kind of regular mainstream news consumption.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what we do as reporters who cover pharma, healthcare, science, medicine, a lot of what we do is try to cut through misinformation and disinformation. And a lot of these health beliefs really center on that type of mis and disinformation that spreads like wildfire. And so it was curious to me that, a lot of the people who fell into that category of believing one or believing three or more said that reported that they consume traditional health media, and they're not getting their information predominantly through social media, whether that be Twitter, Instagram, Truth Social. It's tried and true media outlets. And so I'm curious to see, and I'm going to dig into this more as time goes on, how that balance, is it the mention of these topics, the sheer volume of reporting there is on vaccines and risks of vaccines that's leading to these people's beliefs, or is it something else?
Yeah, definitely. And I want to bring Lesha in here because in a prior iteration of MM+M, it used to be Lesha about once a week diving into whatever Instagram or TikTok had to spit at her in terms of medical misinformation. But it's interesting, to your point, Bella, that this is stuff that maybe it's just because it gets brought up on NBC Nightly News or in, the pages of the New York Times or something that people are forming their own opinion. But Lesha, when you went through Bella's reporting and the report that she was actually diving into, what stood out to you in terms of major takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I wasn't surprised that the number was as high as 70%. I feel like we've been living in a time of extremes and polarization when it comes to science and health. We went from COVID, masking, social distancing, a sort of really positive view of vaccines and vaccination, to MAHA and sort of this anti-vaccine sentiment within 5 years, which is kind of a short amount of time for us to be swinging back and forth and kind of getting whiplash in a way. And there's been a lot of talk about high healthcare costs and high drug costs. And I think that's playing into some of the mistrust as well, both on the right and the left. I've heard in person from people, and I've read on the internet, people on both the right and the left, having these negative sentiments about pharma companies. And people really believe, there are some people who believe that pharma companies are not funding cures and they're only making treatments to keep people sick so that they can keep making money. And it's kind of veering into this conspiracy theory-esque kind of place that, people on both sides of the political spectrum are genuinely believing. And, I think AI entering all of this just kind of makes that even more complex. And we've talked about this a lot on this podcast and in general at MM+M, just like why this mistrust is happening and what pharma marketers can do to kind of, start addressing it. And I don't know if I have the answer. I did pose this question into Gemini just now because the question of like, why has mistrust increased to where we are today? And it kind of came up with an interesting thought. It said, mistrust is rarely about a rejection of science itself, but rather a rejection of how that science is funded and delivered. So just something to think about. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're talking anecdotally about what people either that you cover or in and around your life have brought up. And I've had the same thing. I have friends of mine who are highly qualified professionals, college educated, all that sort of stuff, and the things that I read this about GLP-1s or I read this about vaccines, like that just comes up in regular conversation. It's like, if I the reporter then have to like correct the record, like what if you're a vaccine manufacturer, what if you're Merck, or what if you're Bristol Myers Squibb or something? Just something to consider. Madden, what did you think about it in terms of I one of the things that stood out to me too is just the broad spectrum, like vaccine hesitancy. We obviously seen on the rise to people that say like, oh yeah, you should drink raw milk. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Like that is kind of that Maha variant that's out there. But what stood out to you looking at the reporting?
I had a lot of thoughts about all of this. My first thought was that a lot of this skepticism, I guess I'd say, if not outright rejection, it feels kind of new to me. I mean, it was, and again, like, I'm the elder statesman here, so I'll think about like in the 80s and the 90s when people would voice opinions like this, they sounded like the dude, they're like, well, let's just like your opinion, man. Now it's so mainstreamed because there are so many different, I think the report makes the point that we're just sort of, drowning in information. There's just so much stuff out there. But it goes back to Media Studies 101, that people seek out forms of media that reinforce their pre-existing opinions. And if you are inclined to want to drink raw milk, then you're going to seize on these things. And, I don't know, I drank raw milk one time and just got sick as hell. And the farmer who gave it to me said, you're going to get sick as hell, but I wanted to try it. And
how long ago was this?
It was in the 90s. It was probably like 1992 or so.
Okay.
When I was living upstate and I knew farmers, and they gave me the milk. So what strikes me though, are just a couple of those things that I said, that people seek out things that reinforce their existing opinions. Why you would have an existing opinion that holds that vaccines are used to control population is sort of beyond me, but I think it's the sort of thing that we need to get our hands around, like why people choose to believe something like that. And it goes back to what Lesha said about the institution funding it, which goes back to something that I've written about, which is pharma reputation, like why pharma doesn't do a better job of promoting the actual benefit. And there are, myriad benefits that pharma delivers, but the industry as a whole doesn't do a very good job at all of telling people, hey, this really does help improve your life. Ask a cancer patient.
And I'm curious too, like how you rectify, because I'm sure there are younger, more junior medical marketers who are out there working for either a big 20 pharma or somewhere in the biotech space or something. They're like, yeah, I can't go back and undo Tuskegee. I can't go back and undo the Vioxx controversy. I can't undo these things that have sown so much doubt and mistrust with the pharma industry. I want to blaze our own path forward and talk about these treatments that can have a positive impact on life-threatening or life-compromising disease states and conditions. And it's got to be frustrating to be presented with that and say, oh, there is no silver bullet and there is this drowning in information that we're suffering from. Like, how do you break through that noise when there's decades, if not centuries ahead of you that you have to cut through?
You have to listen to people. You have to hear them. It's like, you can say like, hey, look, you sound like a wingnut to me because you want to drink raw milk. But like, what is it that's led you to this conclusion? what is it about, have they had bad experiences with the food supply? Did they live in Europe where milk is processed differently and which is why it tastes different? I don't know, but it's easy to just reject them out of hand. But this study shows that like we do that at our peril. Any medical communicator, health communicator does so at their peril.
Bella, I want to bring you back in because Madden brought up an interesting point where it's like, especially now in the era of like this fragmented, digital dominated media ecosystem, you can go and find the answer. Like I know plenty of times where I'm looking for something on TikTok and like suddenly your feed is just inundated with, this is what you were looking for. Like I was the other day looking for an appliance and suddenly it's just all appliance stuff. But if you're going in there being like, yeah, I don't want seed oils or I want raw milk, like truly people can say whatever they want on social media and there's no regard for any sort of accuracy or consequence or something like that. That was something that stuck out to me in reading through the report, was just like, oh yeah, like there's also just this pipeline where you can go and do and say whatever and there's no regard for what happens to you as a patient, as an HCP or something. I don't know if that resonated with you at all, but it was something that stuck out to me.
Do you mean in terms of like how consumers are perceiving that information?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it feels very irresponsible. And I think what's interesting in listening to Madden talk a little bit there is that when I was talking with the folks from Edelman about the report, they said there's almost this sentiment or this goal of, like communicating with people like they're, what is the rule of thumb, like fifth graders. And so using accessible language, using layman's terms to communicate science. And I think that's, and that, they agree that that's like a noble goal. However, one of the biggest disservices to the cause of effective like medical and health communications is treating people like they're dumb and like they can't understand or think critically about like big scientific issues or, how science intersects with policy and society writ large without getting too philosophical. And so I think that when we think about these bad actors, I was talking this morning with a source about this kid on TikTok who like is like, I eat 7 steaks a day. And he's like, I don't party. I don't drink. I eat steak. I only eat steak. Like how, I don't know that anyone's drawing like actual like health and medical decisions out of that or making any, I think he's mostly just getting trolled. But, it's like, I think there is an opportunity here for providers or even people who aren't credentialed but are able to be relatable and to talk to audiences in a way that makes them feel more intelligent, more informed, to Madden's point, less ostracized or cast out for their ideas that maybe no one's asked them why they held such an idea. It's scary that people are going around thinking that vaccines are a tool of population control. How do we get there? But I think that, in just talking to folks for this story, a big part of it is not only finding out how they conceived of those ideas, but how we can put more reputable people, more reputable information in front of them in a way that resonates.
And that's something too. I want to bring you in there because I think about it where it's like you said that, oh yeah, back in the 80s and 90s, these were the outcasts. These were the people that was like, oh yeah, tinfoil hat, all that sort of stuff. And if anything, they have just made their own community on the outskirts of like mainstream thought and acceptable. And it's like, okay, so like admonishing them and saying, oh, you're crazy, whatever, like that clearly wasn't the messaging or narrative that's going to work. So it's like, how do you bring people back into the tent? How do you flip that script in a way, I
don't know if you can. I mean, the thing about the great thing about the internet is that, everybody now has a voice and everyone can be a publisher. The bad thing about the internet is that everybody has a voice and can now be a publisher. And, I think it's incumbent on the platforms to do some policing. Mm-hmm. The amount, we as a publication protected by the First Amendment have a responsibility that goes with that to not publish bullshit. Mm-hmm. And, anybody with 23,000 followers, 50,000 followers on Instagram can put up whatever they want. And they do. I wrote a story a couple of months ago about peptides. Mm-hmm. So my feeds are filled with peptide stuff. And I'm being served ads for gonna slaughter the pronunciation. It's like retatride.
Retatride.
Thanks. It's Lilly's next gen, next gen GLP-1. Beyond that, it's in clinical trials. I should not be getting ads for this. I should not be having this compounded solution sent to my house in New Jersey because I'm not in a clinical trial. And yet there it is. Hey, Meta, what are you going to do about this? This guy is using your platform to sell illegal stuff. Don't you bear some responsibility there? And it just makes me scratch my head every time that they say like, hey, man, no, we don't have that responsibility. They claim the First Amendment responsibility. They claim the First Amendment protection when it suits them, and then they dodge it when it doesn't suit them.
Yeah,
and I think that's where a lot of these problems start.
Yeah, and that gets back to a media problem. But I think your point's well taken. Like when I'm on TikTok, I don't ever see ads for Novo or Lilly's GLP-1s. I see it for TrimRx, which are AI generated ads. Usually it's like a vial of a GLP-1 talking to me with big cartoon eyes and whatever. And it's like, okay, but why am I seeing that repeatedly and not an actual FDA approved 15-second spot about semaglutide or about tirzepatide or something like that? And that is extremely troubling. And I at least have the vantage point of knowing that that's not real, let alone if my dumb cousin sees it or something.
Right. Or well, given what we were just talking about, maybe you shouldn't call him your dumb cousin.
He's just my cousin, and he knows who he is. Lesha, I wanted to ask if there was anything else that stood out to you from the report. Just again because you went fishing in those seas for so long, and I'm sure you don't regret being in that spot. But like, is there anything else that Edelman touched on that resonated with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bella brought up sort of the social media aspect, and you were talking about, this reminds me of all of the trends that I covered. I'm trying to remember something like bone smashing and
remember the NyQuil fish, or was it NyQuil chicken?
NyQuil chicken.
Yeah, that was a banger on the site. That carried us through the fall of 2023.
Yeah, and like home births and like the hormone cycling stuff. So like, I think that like social media is still rife with all of that. And people are turning to social media influencers instead of institutions and physicians and pharma companies to, get their health information. So that's still very much a thing. And I think it's just something that marketers have to kind of keep in mind as they, expand into social media.
Well, I wanted to wrap the conversation here just with a statistical question, because the reporting was that 70% of respondents said that they hold at least one divisive health belief, and there's 4 of us in this conversation. So statistically speaking, at least 2, if not 3 of us hold at least one divisive health belief. I didn't know if Lesha hopped off, so maybe she saw where this was going.
I'm not touching this one.
But I wanted to throw it out there if anyone is brave enough. You said that you've tried raw milk. I don't believe that you subscribe to raw milk, but if anybody has a divisive health belief, they're willing to volunteer. I was trying to think about it when I was editing the story for you, Bella, and I didn't know that there was one that really came to mind.
Should I read them?
Yeah, give us a couple and see if any resonate. Here's
the list. Animal protein is healthier than plant-based protein.
So I'm not going to say it's healthier. It does offer things that plant proteins don't.
That's what I would say.
Heme iron, for one thing. And
I can see how that one would trip people up, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially with like this focus on protein and a lot of like weight training stuff that you're seeing on social media.
And GLP-1s, wasting muscle, and you need to eat protein to keep the muscle.
I just keep thinking about when they introduced the Impossible Whopper at Burger King, and it's like, okay, like, yeah, is this different than like the cow patty that you were making? But it's still garbage too. So what's up next, Bella?
Fluoride in water is harmful or unhelpful to health.
Okay, that is from the tinfoil crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need good teeth.
Risk of childhood vaccinations outweighs benefits.
No.
That's just a false. Yeah, that's the anti-vax thing.
Yeah. It's just a lie.
Raw milk is healthier than pasteurized milk.
Raw milk is healthier than no. I drink almond milk, so I don't have to worry about the pasteurization.
Raw milk makes delicious cheese, but by definition, cheese is changed milk.
That's a good point. Second to last is acetaminophen or paracetamol use during pregnancy causes autism.
No.
That's a good one. That's a top hit.
It's a top hit.
And finally is the, I think, craziest, which is vaccines are used for population control.
They do control populations. They've let the population grow because now people don't die of communicable diseases. They die of chronic diseases or trauma.
Yeah, it's just so backwards to even think about that, where it's like this thing that is meant to protect and prolong life is somehow controlling.
That one, so there was a conspiracy theory during the AIDS crisis in the 80s and the 90s that the CIA had created the HIV AIDS virus in a laboratory in like Maryland.
Yeah.
And this was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It turns out that, like, hey, guess what? The KGB came up with this one, or Russia came up with this one, planted it in newspapers in Africa, and it just took off. It had a life of its own. But they were like, yeah, we did that. Sure. I mean, it's mischief. It's the kind of mischief they practice. That particular belief feels to me like it came straight from the Kremlin. And again, like, you know, I'm a conspiracist of a different stripe, I guess. But it sounds so crazy that it could only have come from the devious minds from our friends in Moscow.
And if we have any listeners who are in the Kremlin or are former KGB agents, please call in, because I would love to know. It's true, though. Like, all this stuff just gets planted in there. And it's like, and I think back to your generation where it's like, how much of stuff was just chalked up to like, oh, that's an urban legend or whatever. But how did you know? Did you think that Cass Elliot died eating a ham sandwich? Like, that's I hate to be the one to break it to you here, but like, that's the stuff that used to just live in perpetuity.
Huh. Wow. You just blew my mind.
Yeah. Fitz is going to play us off with the Mamas and the Papas.
California Dreamin'.
We'll have that. The Eddie Hazel cover will be the way that we outro out of here. But
we could have gone on for a long time about
absolutely,
this, because this is right in our wheelhouse as marketing communicators.
And it won't be the last time we have this conversation. Bella and I have already had some follow-up conversations about some other stories in the works. And hopefully, I would say, too, for any of the listeners that we have here that are working agency side or even on the client side, too, like, we want to hear from you in terms of what the biggest roadblocks you're running into, the biggest issues there. So you'll be hearing from Bella. And if you don't hear from Bella, reach out to her so we can get the ball rolling on all those stories.
I'm going to get some cheese made from raw milk for my lunch.
I'm not going to do that, but you're more than empowered to do that. That's going to do it here on the MM+M podcast. I'm Jack O'Brien, the managing editor of MM+M. Next week, we're going to come to you. It'll be our first episode of May, which will focus on mental health awareness. So look forward to that. We have a couple of special guests to guide us through that conversation. But in the meantime, take care, and we will see you then.